Hello, everybody. Welcome back to episode 2 on winery hygiene, also known as Tim Rambles On About Cleaning Things. We'll talk to you real soon, so let's go ahead and keep on moving. So, this is kind of what the public thinks a winery looks like. They walk in, there's these spectacular aisles of beautiful, pristine, clean rows and everything like that. But we know that it doesn't look like that exactly. This is what a cellar looks like to cellar workers, and this is actually a real functioning winery that I worked at. This is a place called Indivan. It's in New Zealand, where we processed about 30,000 metric tons, or about 36,000 American tons of Sauvignon Blanc. And this is what it looks like. It's wet, it's dirty, it's slimy. And as the course of harvest went on, the hoses got slimier and dirtier, and the floors got grayer and slimier and dirtier. And it just required a constant upkeep. But this is what a cellar looks like if you are a cellar worker. However, if you're a microbe, it looks a little different. And it kind of looks like this. Whee! Hey, remember when we used to do this kind of thing? Silly pool party? And the reason why I show you this picture is a lot of reasons. Number one is we have a lot going on here. There's a lot more here going on than meets the eye. First off, your cellar is wet, it's warm, and that brings out all of the party microbes. So when you've got an unlimited amount of sugar and moisture and warm, everything wants to come out to play. And so what our goal is to do is when we clean is to remove the food, maybe the alcohol and some of the other things. We might have some microbes left, but we need to take away some of the fun. And the way that we take away the fun is to really shuffle the people out of the equation. So what's sanitation? Sanitation is an attempt to reduce the number of spoilage microorganisms on equipment surfaces. And that's just basically getting rid of the actual bugs. So what we're trying to do is get rid of the pool party. Or in this case, we want to shuffle the microorganisms out of the equation. So where do these microorganisms that we want to get rid of, where do they hang out? Where do they come from? Well, they hang out on berries. They hang out in the vineyard. One of the things that always cracks me up really hard about people is that they sanitize their distimmer, they sanitize their harvest bins and everything, like full on steam sanitize. And then they're going to go out to a vineyard that's really dusty and dirty. And then they're going to get, the vines shaken off completely, where you've got these berries that have been outside. They've been getting, lived on by birds and getting pecked at. They've got lots of things growing on them. And also realize that every vineyard has its own microflora. And there are a number of vineyards that are known to carry some bad actors in with them. So getting an idea of what's happening in each and every vineyard is really important. Another place that they come from is harvesting equipment. So 80 to 90% of all fruit is machine harvested. I know that's a big shocker to most of you, but these machine harvesters, their goal is to run as quick as they can to get their return on investment. That means a lot of times they aren't as clean as they'd like to be. So these harvesters are running 24/7 and just getting God knows what's growing on them. So keeping some sort of sanitation protocol on your mechanical harvesting crew is really important. The other place where they really live is winery equipments and utensils. So distimmer crushers, transfer hoses, ball valves especially are the worst. If you have any ball valves, pop them open, pop the gaskets out, you'll be amazed. Barrels, bungs, and wine thieves. Wine thieves are incredible. Now, the way I want you to think of a wine thief from here on out when you're working in a winery is I want you to think of it as a hypodermic needle. And every time you inject a barrel or you slip, that wand or that wine thief into that bunghole, you are literally piercing the skin and the microflora of that winery, and you're going to introduce something. So think of your wine thief as a hypodermic needle, and every time you utilize that, and that kills me. I go to wineries and people are just sticking them in barrels and pulling things out left and right and everywhere, and it's almost like sharing a needle. And very realistically, I've seen wineries spread an incredible amount of disease through the winery through simply using the same thief without sanitizing it between barrels, and simply sanitize it with some ethanol. That's the easiest solution. Corks can also be a vector if they're not cleaned properly. And then bottling lines, that's a whole nother conversation another time. I'm not going to talk about bottling lines in winery sanitation, even though it's the most important piece of winery sanitation. It's a whole lecture series in and of itself. And let me know if there's some interest in that. I'll be happy to do an entire bottling sterility talk. It's pretty extensive, but we're just going to say that the most sterile thing you have to do is with the bottling line. So microorganisms hang out everywhere. So how do they get into your winery? Well, geez, everywhere. Remember, they're coming in from vineyards. These grapes are in this place called outside. And last time I checked, outside wasn't a sterile environment. It's full of rodents and pests that roam around on the vines outside. They also come into your winery. You better have, by the way, you better have mouse traps in your winery. That's a requirement too. So make sure you've got mouse traps that are dated as to when they went in and when they were changed out if they have baits. So that's another thing you got to check out. And then, of course, there's people. We bring microorganisms in. We interact with other humans. I think we're getting a little bit more of a cue into just how contagious we are as peoples these days. And then other things that can bring things in is just generally the environment. Driving your car driving your car from vineyard to vineyard could transfer phylloxera. The other things that we have are inanimate objects, so say that it's not only just your winery, but just borrowing a piece of equipment from another winery, you suddenly brought in all their microflora. And then the two things I want to talk about the most are concentrates and bulk wine, in terms of, and also, used equipment, especially barrels. The things that I have seen do the most damage to wineries from a sanitation standpoint is bringing in bulk wine that has been unchecked, because other wineries may not have your sanitation protocols. They may not have your cleanliness protocols. They may have things growing in them. You do not know what's in that wine. Test it before you bring it in. Test. I don't want to sound like I'm a person that is trying to endorse, any particular lab, but if you do not have some sort of due diligence done when you're buying bulk wine, you're making a big mistake. Be really, really sure that you know what's in that wine that you're bringing into your winery from a microbiological standpoint before you get yourself in trouble. The other thing that's a big deal is concentrates. Concentrates have all kinds of different kinds of nasty yeast growing in them. So for years that are a little underripe, bringing in different types of concentrate to chaptalize and other things like that can wreak havoc on your wine. The other thing I see a lot of problems is with used equipment, especially old barrels. Brettanomyces lurks everywhere, and once you've got it, you got it. It's a winery transmitted disease, and once you bring it in, you bring it in. And the place I've seen that come in most, and for those of you who don't know what Brettanomyces is, it's a yeast that'll make your wine kind of smell medicinal in best case. Worst case, it'll make it smell like a big pile of horse poo. And the place I see that come in most is from used barrels. And older wineries tend to have more of it, and that's just a fact. The longer a winery exists, the more likely you're going to have it. So don't think that just because it's a really high-end special winery that they're somehow immune to Brettanomyces. I would definitely check those barrels beforehand. And the way that you would check it beforehand would be to go ahead and fill that barrel up with a little bit of hot water, bung it down for a little bit, let it pull some of the wine out, and then of the pores, pour it in a tube and send it out for some sort of microbiological analysis by a third-party lab. So what's the difference in cleaning versus sanitizing? Cleaning is getting rid of all the food. It's getting rid of all of the stuff that microbes would want to eat. But the thing is that sanitizers themselves don't really know the difference between a food source and a microbe. They treat kind of everything that's carbon-based anything, whether it's an amino acid or a sugar or whatever it is, they treat it all the same as a yeast or a microbe. So if you have a lot of food around, the sanitizer itself is going to not work very well on the microbes because it doesn't recognize otherwise. So the cleaning is getting rid of all the stuff, and then sanitizing is this final step. After you've done the majority of the work of cleaning and getting all the food out of the room, sanitizing is this last step of inactivating microbiological contaminants. Alone, it's not anything, but it's that next step after cleaning that makes sure that we're running a sanitized winery. So here's some sanitizers, and I'm going to go through these one at a time and talk about their advantages and disadvantages. So sodium percarbonate is the same as we talked about in the cleaner section. Sodium percarbonate is sodium carbonate with the per, and the per here is peroxide, also known as peroxycarb, percarb, other things like that. Extremely commonly used in Walla Walla. In my experience, I've seen more wineries use peroxycarb than just about any other cleaner. And the reason why we like this is it's a combination cleaner and sanitizer. So we get that cleaning properties from the sodium carbonate, but then we also get some hydrogen peroxide. And hydrogen peroxide is really good at knocking out all sorts of yeast and bacteria. So that's the nice thing is not only does it get rid of the fat, oil, tartrate, sugars, but it also helps to neutralize microorganisms. The downside is hydrogen peroxide is an oxidizer. And if you ever hear about oxidized wine, well, peroxide can do that. And also, the other thing is hydrogen peroxide does react with any sulfur dioxide in your wine to become sulfuric acid, and you can wipe your SO2 out in your wine really quickly. So again, if you do it, it's great, but you're still going to have that as acid rinse that's going to still be required. Again, we've got that sodium down the drain just as before, not as strong as caustic soda, but it's a really good solution. So you get that combination cleaning and sanitizer all in one cleaner. So parasitic acid, also known as PPA or PAA, and the difference here is that this is a fantastic way to not only neutralize your basic cleaner, like your peroxyacetic or your sodium percarbonate or sodium hydroxide, but it also helps to break down the cell membrane of mold, bacteria, yeast, and other vegetation. So it's a really effective not only neutralizing agent for that basic cleaner, but it also brings that peroxide to the equation to help neutralize a lot of microflora in the background. It's a very effective sanitizer used in a lot of industries. And the reason why we like it in the wine industry is you can smell it. Well, good or bad. It smells like vinegar. So it's not exactly the favorite smell you want to have in your cellar, but the upside is that if you're a winemaker and you walk in the cellar at the end of the day and it smells like peroxyacetic acid or acetic acid, you know that your cellar crew's done their job. You know that they finished it. So that's the downside is also an upside. It can be an inhalation irritant at high enough concentrations. You need to make sure that when you mix peroxyacetic acid, not only do you follow the instructions really clearly, you also need to use cold water, not hot water, because acetic acid is a volatile acid, and if you mix it with hot water, it will burn your eyes. Also, the other thing about peroxyacetic acid is then when you buy it, it's concentrated, and the hydrogen peroxide in it is about 20 to 30% hydrogen peroxide, and it will burn you. So when you're mixing this, make sure that you're using gloves, you're using proper face shields and proper personal protective equipment because I've actually seen somebody get blinded from this. A girl named Hannah that we worked with in New Zealand got this concentrate splashed in her eye and she lost vision in one of her eyes because she wasn't wearing her face shield. So this is, although it is very, very good, it is very dangerous. So be careful with it. The trade name is known as Purisan, 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 if you wanted to go buy it, and it's available through a place like Grapeland Supply. Another thing that you could include, again, that extra little bit, is quaternary ammonia. Now, I wouldn't use this on a day-to-day usage, but what quaternary ammonia is really, really good for is when you go down at the end of the year, or you're going to be down for a few weeks. Put this in a pump bottle, like a sprayer, like you'd spray for weeds, and go inside of a tank before you go down for a few weeks and spray down the tank, spray down the floor when you're going to go away for a while, because this really is fantastic for keeping microbes down for a while. And it's also just a nice way to keep that microbe, kind of background microflora down a little bit. Doesn't really have any cleaning ability, so if you're not completely clean, it's no point. It's moderately expensive, but it also can burn you a little bit. But what can't you at this stage in the wine? We're talking about winery cleanliness, so it's a really good idea to keep around as a little extra something when you're going to go down for a few weeks or a few months in between things, just to keep that microflora down. I want to talk about iodine. I don't normally talk about iodine a whole lot because it's typically used in the brewing industry. It's not terribly useful in the wine industry because the pH range is pretty narrow and pretty high. The nice thing is effective at low doses. It's very, very good, however, at killing not only yeast and molds, but it's also really good at killing viruses. So if you're looking for something to sort of keep that background not only microflora down, but keeping some of the background viral load down, iodophores are iodine is useful for that. So this can be an extra part of your cleaning and sanitation protocol if you're trying to take things one up a notch in terms of virus loading in your winery. Again, it's worthless if there's any sugar around. So if you haven't cleaned really well, it's pointless. It's a powerful oxidant. You don't want to get it in the wine. And then it dyes everything orange. If anybody's ever had surgery, you know that your skin's died for a few days after you get this wiped on you, but a very, very good tool for keeping some viral loads down. And again, just one thing that you can add to your cleaning protocol every now and then, just to keep the microbes guessing or keeping anything from building up resistance. All right, let's talk about ethanol. Good old-fashioned ethanol, Everclear. This is pretty much the most effective sanitizer there is, also known as a sterilizer. It's fantastic. It works almost instantaneously, but you don't want to use it at full strength. And the reason why you don't want to use it at full strength, there's no water. And without water, it won't get pulled inside of a cell. So if you spray it on the cell of a microbe or virus or anything, it'll just embolize that cell. It'll shrink. But then once water gets to it, it'll expand and that cell can come back to life. If it's 60 to 70% alcohol, the water will help pull the ethanol inside of that microbe. And once it goes inside, that's when it blows things up. So you actually want to have it slightly diluted. It's more effective at 60 to 70% than it is at full strength. The reason why I also want to mention ethanol is that if you're a winery and you make some bad wine, you screw things up, you make a mistake, don't throw the wine out. I know wineries throw out wine all the time, and it kills me. Get it distilled. There are plenty of distilleries out there that will happily do this. For making hand sanitizer, you can send out your wine to have it done. We used to use 2nd Street when they had a big still in town. Right now, I send it up to Black Heron and in Richland on Keene Road, and they do a really nice job of making me some high-proof spirits at a fairly inexpensive price out of wine that I would have normally thrown down the drain. And then I can use it for sanitation purposes. And so the reason why we like this is keeping sprays around are really, really valuable for a variety of reasons. Number one, sampling valves. Anytime you sample, there's a good chance a bunch of fruit flies are going to fly in there, so spray it down with ethanol. Bottling line parts for O-rings and seals, valve seals. It's a great hand sanitizer, and it kills everything. It'll even kill you in the right concentration. So the fact of the matter is, it's really, really, really good. Downside is it's really expensive. The other side is you got to log it. The TTB tracks it. You've got to tell you how much you brought in. You got to talk about how much you use. It's one more thing to add to your 4120. And the other thing is that seller hands think it's fun to drink cleaners, and then they end up like that. Not that I've ever seen one of our students do that before, but I have. Lastly, not lastly, but close to the end, UV light. I want to talk about UV light in a reasonable way. This has come and gone in my career where UV light's going to be the next big thing. It's going to be the next thing that helps us to, sanitize without using any kind of water. And so it's pretty good for surface sanitation, really good in laboratory usage. And the idea here is that we would be able to sanitize tanks with just UV rays to kill off microbes. We would just basically cook them off with UV radiation. The results for wineries are pretty low in terms of being an absolutely really good sanitizer. Because if there's any type of shadow, there's anything where the light can't penetrate, it doesn't get the job done. However, something that might be of use for this, and it's very good in laboratory scenarios, is sort of keeping what I would call background microflora down. And why this is important is that we talk about virus transmission and things like that. If you were to replace some of your fluorescent lights in your cellar with some UV lights, you can bring the outside indoors effectively. And in that case, you could help to keep microflora down, not only wine microbes, but viruses and other things can help to minimize that, to create a healthier working environment inside of a winery, not only keeping microflora down, but maybe some viral load too. Downside is, again, there's no surface penetration. Any shadows or films won't do anything. And again, if you were to stand under one of these long enough, you might get, melanoma. So there's some downsides to that. All right, ozone. I want to talk about ozone. Ozone and I have a tenuous relationship. And so, but what I want to talk about here is basically from a truly, scientific standpoint. Ozone was a huge deal in the late 90s, early 2000s. Now we're talking, 20 some odd years ago, but that kind of dates me in my career. Ozone came in as the end all to be all. And the reason why it came in as the end all to be all, it was in the 1990s that we discovered that chlorine was really bad for the wine industry. We used to use chlorine on everything, and I loved chlorine. Bleach was amazing. You poured it on the floor and it just sparkled. Everything just sparkled so incredibly beautifully. It was fantastic. I loved chlorine. It was just the best thing ever. Killed everything, just beautiful. Problem is that it has some issues. We'll talk about that in a second. So along came ozone, and it was going to solve all the problems that chlorine had. Didn't have to clean things according to manufacturers. Just put ozone on it and go. It was fantastic. It's a powerful oxidizing agent, which is what it does, O3. And its half-life in water is about 20 minutes. So why that's important is it's an oxidizer, and it has to completely deplete before you add water to it. So one of the things I've seen people do is rinse a barrel with ozone, then add it wine right away. That's terrible. It's really hard on the wine. So if you use ozone, not only do you have to rinse the barrels again, you have to let them sit for about an hour or two to let that ozone deplete out before you add wine to it. Just a tip for using ozone. It's really quite a bit heavier than air, so it's really useful to use in a winery, especially at night, to have fire at maybe 2 in the morning when no one's around. And then it can come in and again knock down, not as a liquid, but using it as an ozone gas to come and knock down microflora in the background. It's not a bad idea. It's something you can add to your ventilation system. And then the thing is about ozone that's particularly interesting is you got to have 1 to 5 milligrams per liter or parts per million to be effectively kill microbes. And so you've got to have quite a bit. So you can easily get about 10 milligrams a liter into water, so you can easily get the concentration up high enough to kill microbes. And the other thing that's really nice about ozone is there's no chemicals down the drain. It breaks down completely, so there's nothing that's going to go damage your water treatment plant. The downside is it's a toxic gas. It's a powerful oxidizing agent that will oxidize your wine. And it really, is a pretty effective little tool as a gas. The downside is if you've ever smelled a concentration of ozone high enough to really do damage to wine microbes, it will burn you and burn you bad. The odor threshold for humans is at about 0.2 to 1 milligram per liter. And so the toxic threshold for humans is around 0.2 milligrams per liter. So the level that it takes to be really effective against wine microbes is toxic enough to kill the person or really hurt the person that's cleaning with it. So this is sort of the challenge with ozone. I mean, although, and there's been studies done in barrels, and really the ultimate is steam. And ozone didn't fare any better than water, didn't fare any better than chlorine dioxide. It didn't fare any better than anything against Brettanomyces, whereas Brett was, steam was about the only thing that worked. So, I mean, what I would say about ozone is it's not the end all to be all. It's a useful extra tool if it's something that you wanted to use to, add to your winery cleaning regime, sort of like adding quaternary ammonia, sort of adding star sand, adding one extra thing to keep microbes guessing, to keep microflora pressure down in the background. That one extra little thing that helps you to be that much cleaner. Ozone's good for that. But what I wouldn't do is rely on it to be an end all to be all, because the concentration is required enough to do the sanitation that they ask it to do is dangerous to humans. And then for sanitation, this is the ultimate: hot water and steam. Steam has been being used for over 150 years to sanitize things. It's called the pasteurization effect after Louis Pasteur, who discovered microbes. We know this works. It's fantastic. It works on barrels, tanks, and bottling lines. The penetration depth depends on how long you want to steam something for. You can re-sanitize a barrel completely back to new if you steam something long enough to get it over 150 degrees all the way through the barrel. And now in the process of doing that, you'll probably nuke half the flavor of the barrel, but you can absolutely sanitize anything completely with steam. The downside is it requires a lot of juice. And then the only way that you can measure the time and the effectiveness of it is by measuring it. So time and temperature. Now we're looking back 30 years here at this graph right here, this chart right here. And if you're going to sanitize a bottling line, you're going to really sterilize something, go to sterile bottling. What you do is you turn on your steamer, whatever steamer that is, whether it be a wet steamer or dry steamer. And then at the end of the hose, at the end of the bottling line, at the end of the heaviest piece of metal, you go measure a temperature. And once you see a temperature get up to around 200 degrees Fahrenheit, you can set your timer. And then after 20 minutes, you know that bottling line is sterile. So this is this is the gold standard right here. If you want to sanitize a bottling line completely, time and temperature are the way you do it. And so this is a graph from how long it takes to kill stuff. And so pasteurization happens much, much faster the hotter you get. And so in temperature in centigrade, you can see once we get up about 70, 73, 74 degrees centigrade, it only takes a fraction of a second to kill something. Now realize this is a fraction of a minute. So this is a logarithmic graph. So that once we get up to that really high temperature of around 70, 73, 74 degrees centigrade, we basically have instantaneous sanitation. And that's the lethal zone, and that's lethal for everything. And just like people, if you were to be in that temperature for any period of time, you're not going to last very long. And these microbes are the same. So sanitation is, the ultimate form of sanitation is through pasteurization, and there just really isn't anything better out there. That's been proven time and time again. So steamers are very useful, but I want to be really, really clear about steaming things. Steaming things is very dangerous. It requires very specialized equipment, and you better have proper protective equipment, and you better cool down between touching anything. I've seen a lot of people get steam burns. I've seen a lot of people get injured with this. Although it is very, very effective, it is also very, very dangerous. So be really, really careful when you use steam. And then I kind of want to close out with chlorine. We used to love it. It was the best. It is a very effective antimicrobial. And the reason I'm mentioning this now is because everywhere right this minute is running out of Clorox. They're running out of Clorox wipes. They're running out of this. They're running out. It's very highly recommended to be used against the virus. Problem is that if you get it into your winery and you complex with any molds that have grown on any wood from being moist in your winery or behind walls, it will complex into 2,4,6-trichloranisol. And that is the compound that's responsible for cork taint in wine. And the reason why this is important is that TCA, or 2,4,6-trichloranisol, also known as TCA, can be detected in parts per trillion. 1 tablespoon of TCA would ruin all the wine on Earth. That's right, all the wine on Earth. It takes a very small amount. So although this is highly recommended for use against viruses, keep it away from your winery. Get out those iodophores, get out the ethanol. There are other things out there. This is not something we need to have in our winery. It's also really important for you to realize if you're going to be producing food in your winery and you're going to be using this as the food cleaner, or sanitizing agent, don't use quaternary ammonia or something else. This is not something you want to have in your winery. So kind of winding things up, cleaning and sanitation protocols. There's no perfect solution. Use a variety of methods, keep those bugs guessing. Eventually, something will even want to eat those Brussels sprouts. Generally, a high pH clean followed by a low pH rinse is the standard cleaning, and then you come in and sanitize. Heat is very effective, but it's dangerous and costly. A lot of cleaners are really no better than clean, warm water. Ozone might be that way. Most of these are hazardous to your health, so you got to be careful. Use proper protective equipment. And then cleaning is really more important than sanitation, except for when bottling. You got to make sure things are really immaculate. So in closing, you need to come up with some cleaning and sanitation protocols for your winery. You've got to have sanitation standard operating protocols. Like I said, there's going to be a folder that you can take a look at for these. You should have one for how do you prepare your chemicals, what are you going to clean, how are you going to clean, and what, when, and how, and who's going to be doing this. Again, general housekeeping is the most important part. All in all, have a great vintage, wash your hands, and stay safe. I look forward to talking to you all. Take care, and cheers.